everybody. It's nice to see you here. The clock in the back is wrong, so we're going by Greenwich Mean Time, and it's 7 o'clock. We're very happy to have today Representative Elijah Cummings and Mr. Richmond Davis. Thank you both for coming. I'm going to make a safety announcement, and then I will go over the format of the meeting. This is the usual safety announcement. In case of an emergency in the auditorium, please proceed to one of the two exits to your left or to your right. If the emergency is in another location in Charlestown, remain seated until we receive instructions on how to proceed. Also, let me mention that a men's restroom is located on your left through the hallway next to the stage. A woman's restroom is located through the exit on your right and down the hall. We're going to start with a 10-minute introduction, and that will be started by Representative Cummings. And then we'll have questions, and there will be 7 questions, 2.5 minutes each. And I'm going to alternate, so you won't always know who's going to get the next question. And then at the end, we're going to have a 5-minute wrap-up, and Representative Cummings will go first again. And Mr. Davis will go second, and that gives him the last word. Any questions?
Is somebody going to show us what the time?
Yes, I should have said that.
I didn't see you. Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. 2.5 minutes, right? Did I say 2.5?
We can start? Ms. Kowalski?
Just a minute.
We're on. Good. Good evening, everyone. Come on, we can do better than that. Good evening, everyone. It is certainly my honor and pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Ms. Kowalski and the Charlestown Legislative Committee for creating and making this forum happen. This is what democracy looks like. As a point of, and I want to certainly say good evening to my opponent, Mr. Richmond Davis. I want to thank you for being a part of this process. Now, I just wanted to start off by a point of personal privilege of just recognizing the fact that on my way over here, I got a call that my good friend and my mentor, one of my mentors, I only had 4, but he was one of them. Joseph Tidings died today, and again, I feel very down about it because he and I would talk almost every 3 weeks, and he was always giving me a lot of very sound advice. But more importantly, he was one of our most distinguished United States senators here from Maryland. And so I hope that you will keep his family in your prayers. The other thing that I want to do is just very briefly introduce myself to you. I'm Elijah Cummings, the son of 2 former sharecroppers. My mother and father were sharecroppers in Manning, South Carolina in 1941. They got married and came to the state of Maryland. They came to Maryland from South Carolina because they had been deprived of an education. They had been taken out of their schools when they were in the 4th grade and made to pick tobacco, pick cotton, strawberries, and what have you. And that's the way it was down there. And so they came to Maryland, and Baltimore in particular, because they wanted us to have a better life before we were even born. We weren't even born yet, the 7 of us. And so we came. My father got a job at Bethlehem, not Bethlehem Steel, but Davis and Chemical. Worked there for 45 years, never missed one day as a laborer. And my mom was a domestic. She basically cleaned floors and took care of people's houses in Guilford and Roland Park. And so I realized in one generation, we went from sharecroppers to the Congress of the United States of America. Only in America could that happen. Only in America. And I would be more than remiss, if I did not take a moment to pay special homage to somebody who's truly touched my life and changed the trajectory of my destiny. I didn't know he would be here. I didn't know he lived here. Mr. Haight was my English teacher at Baltimore City College. He was, and let me tell you something, he was a hard teacher. He was hard. But I wanted to, and thank you, Mr. Haight, for all that you've done to touch my life and to make a difference. And I really mean that. As far as tonight is concerned, ladies and gentlemen, when the election took place between Hillary Clinton and President Trump, I was the first person in the Congress to say these words, that this is not about Hillary, this is not about President Trump, this is about a struggle and battle for the soul of our democracy. I said that and I meant that. We've seen some things that our country right now is in a very difficult situation. I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat. The fact is that we want to preserve the democracy that we have. We want to preserve that democracy. We do not want it, I don't want it to be taken apart because, as I said to you a moment ago, only in America could I have achieved the things that I achieved, but only because we have a democracy. And I will never, ever forget that. And so I want you to understand what my priorities have been. One of my major priorities has been trying to make sure that we maintain a decent, affordable, and accessible health care system. We have a situation now where millions upon millions of people do not have health care and do not have health insurance or getting treatment that is subpar. And so the fact is that a lot of people, sadly, are dying, literally dying or suffering needlessly. And so that's why I was a strong advocate of the Affordable Care Act. A lot of people had their issues with it. President Trump has done everything in his power to try to destroy it, and my Republican friends have voted on it at least 60 times to repeal it, but not replace it with anything reasonable. And so my effort has been to try to keep it afloat. Believe it or not, the Affordable Care Act has made the cost of Medicare in and of itself cheaper. Why? Because we have more people that are getting the kind of preventive care that they need and getting the things that they need to stay healthy. The other thing that I put a lot of emphasis on is prescription drugs. There's no person in Congress that has fought harder on this issue than I have. You can go, I don't know about you, but you can go, I have people in this district who can go to CVS or Rite Aid in January and get a prescription that costs $50 and go back in June and it may cost $400, literally. And we have bought folks before our committee, these drug manufacturers, asking them why this is, and they tell us it's because of research and development. And come to find out it's not about research and it's not about development. It's about paying lobbyists a lot of money to influence the Congress, and it's about advertising. You can't even turn on your television, particularly during the daytime, without seeing an advertisement telling you about all the side effects. Remember that? You notice that? It seems like the side effects have more time than the good of the medicine. But my point is that we have to do something about it, and we can do something about it. The first meeting that I had with President Trump, I'm one of the few members on the Democratic side that went to meet with President Trump. I went to his inauguration. A lot of people said, why are you going to his inauguration? I said, because he is the President of the United States. And I have constituents that have needs and have concerns, and I want to go and meet with them. So I went to his inauguration. Right after the inauguration, he had invited me to the luncheon. I'd never been invited to a post-inaugural luncheon in my life. So he invited me, and the first thing he said, Cummings, I know that you're concerned about those prescription drugs. I said, yes, sir. He said, you know what? Those companies are getting away with murder. I said, I agree, Mr. President. He said, why don't you come up to the White House and meet with me? We'll talk about it. I went to the White House, talked about it with Congressman Welch from Connecticut. We went up there. We had a great meeting, wonderful meeting, and then radio silence. And now the cost of, and he told me that he was going to help me get some legislation through where we could reduce the prices, where Medicare would be able to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to bring the prices down. Guess what? The prices have, for every time a price has gone down, 96 other drugs have gone up. During the period that I'm talking, since our president has been in office. So we've got a lot of things to deal with, but I want us to fully understand this is a critical moment in our country's history. I'm sure that people will look back years from now and ask the question, 200 years from now, look back and say, how did you go from President Obama to President Trump? And they will ask, well, what did you do to address the issue? Well, one of the things that, as you probably know, that I am now the ranking member of the Government Reform and Oversight Committee. If it so happens that the Congress is controlled by the Democrats when we win, I will become the chairman. And I will try to bring some accountability to the office, to the executive branch. That's what our Constitution says we're supposed to do. And so I am honored to be the congressman for this district. I cannot tell you, every time I ride into D.C., I pinch myself because I realize that I live in a great country. But you know what? To me, I want to pass on a great country to generations yet unborn. Thank you.
And good evening to you. My name is Richmond Davis. I'm the Republican candidate, opposing, obviously, Mr. Cummings for the 7th Congressional District. It's very easy, as the congressman has done, to throw out platitudes like this is a battle for the soul of America, preserve democracy, as if his opposition doesn't have the same concerns and love for this country. What you didn't hear from Congressman Cummings is basically an identification of what motivates him in terms of philosophy. Well, I will tell you, if you take a look at Mr. Cummings' webpage, you'll find something very interesting. He prides himself in being one of the most progressive leaders in Congress. What does that mean? Progressive, it's used this day, at this day and age, means he's left-wing. That's his philosophy. What do we mean by that? I think you get a pretty good idea that people who are on the Democratic Party, on the left side of the Democratic Party, as Congressman Cummings is, tend to favor government involvement in basically everything they do. Let's talk about health care. Congressman Cummings talks about Obamacare. Well, that's not good enough for him. He is in favor of Medicare for all. Well, that's rather interesting. Apart from the expense, the more important thing is that the solution to the problems of the health care in this system? If one takes a look at the report of the Trustees Commission on Social Security, a report that came out a few months ago, you will learn that the Medicare system as presently constituted is running out of money in 10 years. It seems to me that we ought to be looking in a different direction. Now, Mr. Cummings made no reference to the Republican plan that was narrowly defeated in the United States Senate that called for a revamping of the healthcare system in a way that's consistent with the individual as opposed to the government's involvement. The Republican plan, for instance, talked about health savings accounts to give the individual more control over how his dollars are spent. Talked about making block grants to the states to handle in an innovative way, hopefully among the 50 states, the problem with Medicaid expenditures. Right now, we give to Medicaid recipients a particular sum of money based upon their needs. There's no cap to it. And so what you have happening is a burgeoning of healthcare costs because there's no practical cap. And the individual has no incentive to keep a hold on the monies that are spent. That's the problem with the government approach. Fine, open up the checkbook. Let somebody else pay for it. We right now have a $20 trillion federal budget. Oh, that's just a big number in terms of deficit. That's just a big number. But what does it mean? Interest rates are going up. That means the money, that $20 trillion is going to be more expensive from an interest perspective. How are we going to afford all of that? Those are questions that have to be answered. It's not sufficient to say, whatever you want, you get. That's not the real life. That's not the real world. We have to establish priorities. Now, let me give you a very good example of the priorities that I think are askew in the Democratic Party, and one in which Congressman Cummings participated. Do you remember 6 or so years ago when there was a question about sequestration? Fancy word that simply meant we're going to, and this is a policy that Congressman Cummings voted for, we're going to say between defense expenditures and non-defense expenditures / domestic spending, we're not going to make a distinction. If you increase one by a particular percentage, then you increase the other. Wait a minute. What's more important here? The most important concern for a member of Congress is to do his part to safeguard this country. Military is number one. Military is number one. That is the primary responsibility to keep us safe. That's a very clear-cut difference between a Republican approach and a Democratic Party approach. Republicans are in favor of limited government. What does that mean? Constitutionally, I can give you some argument going back to the founders, but think about this. When we limit government, what are we allowing to expand? The individual. After all, that's what the Constitution was designed to do, to restrict the power, the authority of the sovereign, of the federal government, to control our lives. To the extent that there is a limitation on government, the individual has more authority. And the individual is the key priority of the Republican Party. What do we mean by cut taxes, reduce taxes? Republicans, generally speaking, are in favor of lower taxes. Well, what does that mean? We're talking about freedom, economic liberty. And there are also benefits to cutting taxes. Now, I'm not sure that Congressman Cummings actually cast a vote on that subject, but I'd be pretty confident that he didn't support the cut that was passed by the administration. And one can say what one wants about Donald Trump in terms of his manner. I happen to be an old-fashioned sort of fellow, and his way of doing things is not the way that, generally speaking, I would follow. But I think his policies have done pretty well by this country so far. Now, I don't expect there to be unanimity in this group. I see a couple of shaking heads. But just think about that. Think about what has been accomplished, and forget the words for a moment. Forget the form. Focus on the substance. And I think if you do that, President Trump deserves a lot of credit. We talk about education, and I want to tell you something that's perhaps a light side you might enjoy somewhat. I happened to be reading the results of a poll this morning talking about civics knowledge of Americans based upon our age category. And I will tell you, all of us, including Congressman Cummings, are over 65, pretty much all of us. And the results were that if you took a look at the test, and I happen to have a sample, 100 questions, when you sit for your test, become a naturalized citizen, you can be asked up to 10 questions orally of the 100 on this list. It's no big surprise. It's sort of like taking a driver's license test. The answers are there, but you do have to be familiar with them. The test was given, and breaking it down by group, there were over 70% of people in our age category who passed, who would have passed the naturalization test. The downside is of those under 45, 81% failed. Think about that. Now, one can, and I will tell you, just to give a flavor of what we're talking about here. One of the questions, what happened at the Constitutional Convention? I don't know, it was a baseball game? Or another one, name one war fought in the United States in the 1900s. It was not the American Revolutionary War, and it was not the Civil War. Yet some people answered it that way. There's a comedic aspect to that, those results, but actually they're rather serious. If we as Americans do not understand what this country is about, if we don't understand the concepts of limited government, if we don't understand the Bill of Rights, we are in big, big trouble going forward. Now, we're not responsible in the sense that we feel have those views, but maybe we contributed. Maybe we're all responsible for the fact that our young people are so poorly educated in things that matter to the survival of this country. If we don't appreciate what this country's about, what's the sense of fighting for it? Thank you.
The first question will be directed to Mr. Davis. The U.S. Justice Department has decided not to defend the ACA against lawsuits. This could cause insurers to deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. What do you think should be done about this?
Well, the Republican position has been, in terms of the bill that I referenced earlier, is that coverage for pre-existing conditions should be maintained. But there's also, and here we'll talk a little bit economics. I will grant you, if a person has a pre-existing condition, they want coverage. The problem is, from an economic point of view, who is supposed to pay for it? Nothing's for free. So if someone has a pre-existing condition that's very expensive, people who don't have that condition have to pay for it. Now, if a person's a smoker, I'm going to give you the side where you question about the pre-existing conditions. If a person's a smoker and they develop an advanced stage 4 lung cancer, are the rest of us supposed to pay for that person's, shall we say, unhealthy behavior? That's a problem. Now, are there solutions? Why do we have to think, if I might ask, why do we have to think in terms of a broad solution? If there's a particular need, why don't we focus on a particular fund to take care of people in that category, rather than have a broad approach that everyone with a pre-existing condition is entitled to coverage paid for by somebody else? But again, I repeat, this care for pre-existing conditions was a part, and maintaining it was a part of the Republican proposal to substantially change Obamacare.
Representative Cummings, would you please answer the same question? Do you want me to repeat it?
Yes, please.
The U.S. Justice Department has decided not to defend the ACA against lawsuits. This could cause insurers to deny coverage for pre-existing conditions. What do you think should be done about this?
First of all, Mr. Davis has it wrong. Right now, in a Texas case, I just did a press conference about this, so I'm well aware. The Trump administration is not defending our protections with regard to pre-existing conditions. That is very, very significant. I don't know where he got that information from, but it's not accurate. And let me be clear. Mr. Davis talks about the whole idea of who's going to pay for it. There's another question that we need to ask. What's going to happen to those people? they're going to die. Hello, they're going to die. I know what it feels like to lay in a hospital. I just spent 6 months in Johns Hopkins, and I know what it feels like to lay there wondering whether you're going to die. I know what it feels like to be trying to get out of a bed when you can't even get up. I know what it feels like not to know your left arm from your right leg. Come on, some of you all know what I'm talking about. Come on now. Don't act like you're that young. And I guarantee you, if there's anyone here who does not have a pre-existing condition, stand up. I want to see you. I want to see the miracle you. We have one gentleman that does not have a pre-existing condition, and I just to let you know, just keep on living. The fact is that we all will face that. Ladies and gentlemen, I really hate the labels Republican and Democrat and Independent. I hate it. I hate the term. I hate the term progressive. I hate the term, liberal and conservative. You know why? Because the things that I stand for about human issues, human values, morality. I refuse to let people just die. I refuse to. If there's any way that I can do something in my job to avoid that. And so, so I'm going to answer this further when we have more, maybe later on, but all I'm saying is we better be careful with our empathy deficit. Empathy deficit. We're better than that.
Congressman Cummings, the second question, if you would answer it first. Medicare rules require a person to be admitted to the hospital for 3 days, that's 3 midnights, before the patient is qualified for skilled nursing benefits. Currently, observation days in the hospital do not count toward the 3-day requirement. Should the observation days be part of the 3-day requirement? Why or why not?
I think they should. I don't know whether I was in observation during that 6 months or what. But one thing I do know is that I had skilled workers looking over me all the time. And anybody who spends a little bit of time in the hospital knows you don't get any rest because they're constantly in and out of your room, taking your blood pressure. You know the drill. And we've got nurses who are working, and so in other words, healthcare is being given even though it may be observation. So I think it's only fair that it should be considered. Yeah.
Mr. Davis, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, that's a technical question. I don't feel competent to answer it because I don't have the research available to do that. Would like to say something else, though. The idea that I, as a Republican candidate, don't have empathy for people is utterly ludicrous, Congressman. I resent it. I've been a lawyer representing criminal defendants and elder law patients, many in your situation, for over 40 years. I would suggest that just because one has a different proposal, a different approach, does not make one unsympathetic or uncaring or non-empathetic. That's a traditional, usual tactic on the left. If they don't agree with what a conservative is saying, there's something wrong with that person. There must be something wrong. They must be malevolent. That's not true, sir. I take my job as seriously as you do in trying to do the best thing I can in terms of helping people from my perspective on a personal level. I've done so for 40 years. I simply mentioned to you, and let me elaborate. If we have a problem, I'm simply suggesting in terms of people with pre-existing conditions, maybe we need to set up a separate pool to deal specifically with that, rather than revamping the entire system and making people pay for things that we just simply can't afford. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, may I just respond to that? I mean, he took.
No,
okay,
I'm afraid
all right.
not. This is not a debate.
You
Mr.
realize
Davis?
you took time from me to give to him, but it's okay.
I'm giving you the same amount of time.
Okay. No, okay.
Mr. Davis, the third question. What should be done to assure the financial security of Social Security and Medicare?
Excellent question, and one that people don't want to face. We need to change certain things in that system. As I mentioned to you, Social Security, I referenced Medicare's run out of money in 10 years. Social Security, I think it's Part A, is running out in 15 years. We have to stop kicking the can down the road. It was done by President Obama. It was done by President Bush. It's a nonpartisan thing. That is the so-called third rail. The fact of the matter is we have to consider innovative solutions. It may involve raising the retirement age. It may involve having an effect on benefits. It may involve a means test. It may involve an expansion of health savings accounts. It may involve a variety of things to increase the ability of people to support themselves with perhaps lower benefits from Social Security. Having said that, it would not apply to our age group. It would apply to younger people so they can anticipate what's going on. And if I may say, what has Congressman Cummings done to do anything about it? The fact of the matter is he is in a gerrymandered district. 75% routinely vote for him. He does not need to worry about the third rail. There is no political risk as a practical matter for Congressman Cummings. Why isn't he confronting that issue?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I am.
Representative Cummings, do you want me to repeat
No,
the question?
no, I can. I got it.
If you wish to talk about
I got it.
prior question, feel free.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to say, Mr. Davis did not hear me clearly. I'm not saying that you don't have empathy, sir. I said people in our country, I was talking about the country, is lacking in some instances. I believe that you're an honorable man, and I really mean that. And I would never say, I don't speak that kind of language, as a matter of fact, not even in anywhere. So I do respect you, and I'm glad that you at least raised it, but I want you to understand I never said that about you, and don't think that of you. I think you're a true gentleman. Now, I forgot what the question was.
Securing the financial security of Social Security.
Yes. I have done something about it. I voted for the Affordable Care Act, which is very significant. And I did, and keep in mind what I said, there are very few members of Congress on the Democratic side that have met with President Trump. And what did I meet with him about? Prescription drugs. Do you realize one of the reasons why Medicare is got financial problems? Prescription drugs. What the bill that he told me that he would support would allow Medicare to negotiate with the pharmaceutical companies to reduce the prices by at least 50 to 60%. Okay, but right now Medicare is paying a lot of money for the prescription drugs that we all get, and so a lot of people don't realize it because you may not see it, but because it's coming out of Medicare. But that's still a lot of money. The other thing that we've done is we tried to make sure that Medicare is in a situation where people are getting treated and encouraged to be treated to do preventive type things. Believe me, my stay in the hospital taught me a lot about prevention, about preventive things, so that the cost is not so high as we get older, because a lot of the money that we spend in Medicare is when we get much older and trying to save people in the last few years of life. And so, no, I'm very sensitive to that, and I just watched my mom for 2 years go through hospice, and that was not a pretty picture. And so I've got a new understanding of all of that. But no, that's something that I'm very, very concerned about and will continue to work at.
Mr. Davis, the next question is for you. For decades, the inability of congressional parties to work together because of increasing partisanship has created an environment of distrust. From your viewpoints as a legislator and an attorney, how would you work to minimize this partisanship?
I think an individual can only be an example. And I want to commend Congressman Cummings for his not only participating in this, but the tone at which he's adopted. Each one of us is an example for the other. It's not a situation where I can go into a room and say, be nice to the opposition. Personally, as a lawyer, I have to get along with the adversaries. That's what I do. So for me, it's natural. It's not hard at all. And I presume because Mr. Cummings is also, I don't want to call him a retired lawyer, but he certainly still holds his law license. So I think each one of us would have the ability, if we were so inclined, to work with the other side. What we have to search for are common interests. But the biggest problem is, and I touched upon it, and I appreciate the response of Congressman Cummings, we have lost respect for the other side. And my feeling is this is not a question of politicians. Politicians are reflective of society. And the reality is we have turned into a rather uncivil society. If you think about not only interaction, just think what you hear on the internet, what people say on the television shows. We line up in our particular tribes, though I don't like that term either. The fact of the matter is each one of us is an example. And each one of us has a responsibility to do what's right. I hope I would be able to do that. And I would expect Congressman Cummings to do the same.
Congressman Cummings,
Yes.
would you like me to repeat the question?
No, I got it. As a son of two Pentecostal ministers, I learned how to respect other people as a young boy. My mother and father taught us to consider other people's opinions and try to put ourselves in their place. And I try to do that all the time. On my committee, which is one of the most contentious committees in the Congress, I have signed on to Republican investigative letters 800 times. That's unheard of. Why? Because this is when Obama was president, and Clinton. No, Obama. But I did it because I believed that they had a good point. Whatever they were looking into, I said, let's look into it, because that's my job. My mother and father also taught us to have integrity and always seek the truth and defend the truth. And I can tell you it's taken me a long way. I also believe in leadership, and I'm not trying to tout my own horn, but when I was at City College, I was given an opportunity, and it makes me feel emotional. I had an opportunity to be with young men and women, young men, and to have teachers like a guy like Mr. Haight, who taught us all that we could be and taught us that diversity was not, and when I say diversity, I'm not talking about black and white, I'm talking about diversity in general of opinion and anything else. It's not our problem. It is something that we should applaud. And I learned how to get along with others. And if you look at my record, it has always been balanced. It's been about looking at it I try to look at it, issues in the Congress as a judge would. And you would never believe this, but one of my best friends and somebody that I've gotten a lot done with is Meadows, who is the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, probably the most conservative person in the entire Congress. And he would tell you the same thing. Why? Because the things we can agree on, we work together on. Things we don't, we just disagree. Does that say time up? My glasses aren't too good. Okay, all right. I just want to make sure I'm reading the sign right. Okay. That's okay.
Representative Cummings, the next question's for you. There's an income tax deduction for qualified medical expenses that exceed 7.5% of adjusted gross income. Beginning in 2019, the 7.5% rises to 10%. Should the floor of the 7.5% be made permanent instead of expiring as it does now? Why or why not?
I think that it should be. I think it should be made. In other words, yes, 7%. I just think it should be made permanent. I'm going to answer your question. Let me tell you why. I'm very familiar with this question because I went through my income taxes, and for the first time, I had medical bills that exceeded $40,000. I mean, this is what I paid out of my pocket after insurance and Medicare. I think it's important because you know what? That's one of the problems with the tax bill. It really it hurts the elderly. It does because when you make it more difficult to take as a deduction, that's a real problem. And basically, what the Congress did was sadly nickel and dime the American public so that they could give a $1.5 trillion tax cut to people who were wealthy. And that's sad because a lot of people think they got a good deal. I don't think we got a good deal. And people will not really realize the full extent of that tax bill until they get ready to file their taxes come this year, when they see that there are things that they could have taken deductions for before, they're not going to take it. I just had a major conference with all the ministers and nonprofits in my district because with the short form, we discovered that parishioners are less likely to give. Why? Because those deductions are not adding up. I mean, in other words, it doesn't do them any good from a tax standpoint. So, in other words, when they increase the amount for the short form, then there's no need to itemize. And so a lot of churches and other organizations are saying, wait a minute, what? We're going to lose a lot of money. And so I think we're going to have to do some things to straighten out that tax bill. I did not vote for it. And I just think we could have done much better by the American people.
Mr. Davis, would you like me to repeat the question?
No, not necessary. In isolation, I think all medical expenses should be deductible. Lower taxes for the individual. I'm all for that. But we can't view it just in isolation. Things have to balance. The idea is, and we're talking about plans for controlling expenditures, we have to have balances. Now, let me make another point. The congressman makes reference to the tax bill favored the rich. Favorite Democratic can't. Yes, they're the ones with most of the money. That's why they're rich. But what does that translate to? Has anyone noticed the economy of late? The unemployment rate of late? Things are going great in this country. Maybe the tax cut had something to do with that. Everyone benefits from that. But having said that, let me direct something to the congressman more specifically. The heart of his district is Baltimore City. What is he doing? What are the Democrats doing to deal with the fact that although the national unemployment rate is 3.7%, in Baltimore City it's over 6%? What are you doing about that for your constituents, Congressman?
I'll be happy to answer it once I give them.
The next question is for Representative Cummings. What constituent needs do you hope to address during the next 2 years? How would you do that?
One of the main, I still go back to prescription drugs. That's a constituent need. I want to do, another one of my mentors was the late Paul Wellstone. And he said we should do the things as elected officials that go to the center of people's lives. So definitely prescription drugs. I want to also deal with something else. On her dying bed, the last words that my mother said to me in February at 92 years old is, don't let them take away the right to vote. She has seen people harmed trying to register to vote in the South. And that right to vote is very, very fundamental. And you may say, well, that's not a common day, everyday thing. It is an everyday thing. It goes to the heart of our country. And it allows people to control their own destiny. Another thing that I definitely want to be dealing with, I'm going to be dealing with immediately, is the census. There's an effort right now to convince or to get Hispanics and African Americans and others not to apply, not to register with the census, and by putting in what's called a citizenship question. That has never been a question in the census before. It's a matter of whether you're in the United States or not. That's how we are. That's how the census is supposed to be done. Going to be looking at things that again. Am I out of town? Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. Education is so important, and I want to thank him, Mr. Davis, for raising what he raised, because one of the things that sometimes we fail to see is the success stories on things like immigration. You know, when I was very upset about the fact that the Trump administration had taken these children away from their parents, you know why? You know why it was so painful and so emotional for me? Because I could imagine my mother and father coming to keep in mind what they did, came from the South to the North. Why did they come from the South to the North? To have a better life for their children. And if somebody had snatched me away from my mother and did not even give me at least an arm bracelet and put one on her, like they do in a hospital, to identify us with each other, that would be a sin and a shame. And a lot of these children will not see their parents forever. So immigration is something that I really want, and we have a significant immigrant population in the 7th congressional district. But let's be clear. This district is I get about 49% of my votes from Howard County and Baltimore County. I just want you to know that the other 49 comes from the city, but I'll answer the rest of his question in a minute if I get a chance about what I'm doing in the city.
Mr. Davis?
Biggest problem, and again, Congressman and I are in agreement on this, is education. Education is the root of everything. If we're not well educated, life is a dead end for us. Interestingly enough, here's a book I want to recommend. This, not the sort of thing a Republican candidate's normally going to plug. This is by Arne Duncan, Secretary of Education under President Obama. He says the most important thing for the educational success, interestingly enough, we all know it instinctively, is the quality of your teachers. Quality of your teachers. There have been studies done that make very clear, that are cited in this volume, that when you have a system where you are able to weed out the less qualified, and this gentleman here, I'm sure, was a very competent instructor, top quality instructor, as we might term it here, is that those students who are fortunate enough to be in such a classroom as Mr. Cummings was, benefit from it, become a congressman. That is what a quality teacher can give. The problem is, in Baltimore City, where it would be 51%, whatever the number may be, Baltimore City's schools are horrible. That's not to say it's universal. Sure, there's some good schools, but how do you get around the fact that out of this school system, you have the third worst in math and reading? The only ones on the below them are Cleveland and Detroit, which have had all sorts of problems. We need to focus on revamping the educational system. And if that has to do with taking on teachers' unions, so be it. Mr. Cummings gets a lot of support from teachers' unions, so maybe he feels somewhat handicapped despite what he might want to do. But the reality is we have to develop a system whereby we can weed out the teachers who aren't performing, because the studies make very, very clear we do that. We not only improve the quality of the education, but we improve the quality for the students' lives for their entire lifetimes. Incredible as that sounds, that's what happens. You take that child, you teach him the value of learning, and you teach him what he needs to know, he will succeed in life. That's what we need to do.
We're now up to the last question, and I'll start with Mr. Davis. What do you think should be done about gerrymandering? A judge in Maryland has just sent the gerrymandering case in this state back to the lower courts. Do you think federal action is needed?
I'm not sure whether it be state or federal, but certainly something needs to be done. And if I didn't know better, I thought I fed the question to her, because that's one of the problems here. Mr. Cummings represents a district in which he obtains roughly 75% every election cycle. What does that mean? Mr. Cummings is here, and I give him world of credit for that. But many, many times, Mr. Cummings doesn't have the need to show up in town halls and interaction because he doesn't need the votes. He's essentially guaranteed a victory. That's what gerrymandering does. If you take a look, interestingly enough, of his district from afar on the map, you put it on, bring it up on the website, it looks like a prehistoric monster because the way it's shaped, it goes wrong, going through western Howard County, Baltimore City, middle of Baltimore County. And what you've involved in that, you've got heavily urbanized area, you've got a suburban area, you've got an agricultural area. What are the common interests? No, the common interest is you can collect the Republicans like myself in an area where we can't do damage elsewhere. Gerrymandering is a horrible situation, and I will readily concede my party has done it too, and I'm not sanctioning that. It's wrong either way. We need to have a fair system. Governor Hogan has proposed a commission that will be hopefully nonpartisan. There will be partisans on it, but they're going to balance things out. That's what we need to do. So we have districts that make sense, so that people are in a district where there's a fighting chance, rather than a case like the 7th District or several other districts in Maryland where the results are given. And I will say this, that Congressman Cummings, again, I repeat, I give him credit for showing up. A lot of people told me on my side, oh, you'll never see him. He doesn't need to engage. And the fact of the matter is he doesn't. But he's doing it. So I'll give him credit for that, for sure. But that doesn't change the fact that gerrymandering is wrong.
I don't have any. Were you finished? I'm sorry. I got it. I have the. You want me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
Oh, thank you. I got it. I believe in an independent commission. I think we should have one, but it's got to be done in every state. That's the problem. If you saw what has happened in most states, my Republican friends have done a job on Democrats. That's why Democrats get the most votes, but end up with the less seats. I mean, throughout the country. So it has to be a balanced approach. Sounds like California has just about gotten it right with an independent commission. Now, let me be clear. I show up because this is my job. This is my job. I'm a person who, from kindergarten through graduation from high school, never missed 1 minute of school. My father told us, and he understood the value of an education. He said, my father told us, he said, boy, if you missed 1 day of school, that meant you died the night before. And he meant it. He meant that. And so all 7 of us never missed a day of school. Chicken pox didn't make any difference. Measles, we were giving diseases to all kinds of people. The fact is that my father, and I'm so glad he had that attitude. And you know why he had that attitude? Because at the end, when I got sworn in as a congressman, my father came to the swearing in. And I will never forget this, Ms. Kawecki. He came in to the swearing in, and I looked up, and then I saw him crying. It's in 1996. When he came down, I said, Dad, are you crying? He said, yeah, I'm crying. And I said, Dad, I've never seen you cry in my life. I said, why are you crying? Are you just proud that your son is now a congressman? He said, no, that's not why I'm crying. He said, now that when I think about the fact that you got an education and I didn't, he says, now I see what I could have been. What I could have been. Think about that. A man at the end of his life talking about what he could have been. And so that's why I live in the inner city of Baltimore. One of the reasons why I live in the inner city of Baltimore is because I want to be a role model to some of the kids that he's talking about. I go into the schools. I encourage them. I try to do everything. I've established scholarships for my kids. I send 14 kids to Israel every year. Why? Because I realize the greatest threat to our national security is not the terrorists. The greatest threat to our national security is our failure to properly educate every single one of our children. That's the threat. Don't be fooled. And so the other thing as I close, I got 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute. Let me say this. I'm done. All right.
Well, fortunately, it's time for your closing statement. So you have 5 minutes. What would you like us to remember when we go to the polls this fall?
I want you to remember that I consider myself a humble servant. There are some things that, there's some people that come upon the earth and they have dreams. And you know what? They never reach their dreams, never even come close. And they die with the dreams locked up in the casket. And I've been so blessed to have the parents that I had, to have an education that I got with many teachers like Mr. Haight. I literally traveled on the bus. I would get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 6 o'clock, and travel from Edmondson Village to Baltimore City College High School. Why? Because I was in search of a dream. I wanted to be all that God meant for me to be. This opportunity, this job, the thing that gets me going is pain. You want to know what makes me excited? It's about pain. It's about pain of seeing my father talking about what he could have been. It's about the pain of seeing little children in the inner city that I've known since they were little kids, and then the next thing you know, they fall off the road of life, going into drugs and trying to find ways to help them. It's about trying to make sure that our elderly are not placed in a position and listen to me on this. Our Republican friends, I'm not talking about Mr. Davis, I'm talking about the people who are in office. They have already told us that as a result of the tax cut, there's not going to be enough money. So now they're saying we've got to reduce Social Security and Medicare. That's a fact. So you do the big tax cut, but then you turn around and say, oh, we ain't got no money. There's something wrong with that picture. One of the biggest things that's wrong in our picture is we have to have accountability. I'm not here to beat up on President Trump. I'm just saying he's got to be accountable like you, me, you, and you. Nobody is above the law. Nobody. This is the United States of America. And if you don't remember anything else I say, remember this. This is a fight for the soul of our democracy. You cannot cut down the CIA, the FBI, go against the freedom of press, going against voting rights, going against ethical behavior. And I can go on and on and on and expect your democracy to survive. It won't. And the democracy that we know, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will never know. They will never know. I remember when I was a little kid. You all, some of you all remember, we're in that same age group. We used to run up under our desks, hiding from the Russians. Remember that? Remember Sputnik? Come on now. Don't act like you don't know what I'm talking about. We were worried about a country over there called Russia that didn't have freedom of the press. Hello? That had a dictatorship. Hello? Come on, that had oligarchs. You know. What I'm saying is that a lot of the things that we fought against, and by the way, don't forget this one, another thing that we have done, and I hope that we all will never forget this, is that we cannot have somebody in Russia meddling in our elections and not do anything about it. There's something wrong with that, whether you are Democrat or Republican. And so it is the pain that I've seen. It is the pain that I've seen from so many people and the pain that I've experienced in my own family that makes me want to make life better for somebody else. And do they have to look like me? No. Do they have to live in the same neighborhood as I do? No. I will never forget when I was redistricted into Howard County, some of the words that Mr. Davis said have now come back to haunt me and make me feel very emotional. The Sun paper wrote an editorial that said he has nothing in common with the people in Howard County. Well, guess what? I win in Howard County and I win in Baltimore County. Why? Because people know that I am a human being and that I understand their pain. I understand their struggles. I understand what it is to go through life without a silver spoon stuck in my face, didn't even have a plastic one. I get it. But more importantly, I come up with solutions to their problems. And I see every person as one universe. And so I don't ask you for your vote. I take nothing for granted. I beg you for your vote because I want to continue to do what I do, and I want to do it the best that I can do it. May God bless.
Mr. Davis, 5 minutes for your closing statement, please.
Thank you. Congressman Cummings has expressed his point of view and his feelings very effectively, in fact, poetically at times. Congressman Cummings has expressed his views in a very moving, emotive way, poetically at times. But take a look at what Congressman Cummings was telling you. He's an example of what the individual can do. Yet in Congress, he supports the Democratic Party fairly much consistently, which believes in government programs that foster dependency, not independence. I want to suggest that in Baltimore City, that's the heart of the problem. There is a dependency on the government. There's a dependency on handouts, rather than a policy which encourages enterprise, which encourages individual responsibility. Congressman Cummings is a perfect example of what you can do when you apply yourself, whether it be in education or anything else. The problem is that's not an example that Democrats present. Think about the condition of Baltimore City. Fine, it's 51% of his electorate. Well, he lives there. And his very first, and if you take a look at his webpage, he will tell you that when he was first elected to Congress, one of his key priorities was education in Baltimore City, the crying need of his constituents. Well, I recite the statistics, which are undisputed. Education in Baltimore City is in a sorry state. I wish that Congressman Cummings would go into the city and talk to schools, talk about the benefits of individual effort. If he could pull himself out with all the handicaps that he had, they can too. That's a lesson people need to hear, and particularly so, unfortunately. There's so many homes without a strong male in Baltimore City. And it may be unpopular to say that, but the simple fact of the matter is a young male is looking for guidance from older males. Congressman Cummings could provide that. I have to confess, there's no sense in my begging for your vote because I don't think it'd make a whole lot of difference in the sense that there just aren't enough people here. I mentioned to you that the numbers are 75%. I'm running because I want to express a point of view you've heard this evening. It's something I firmly believe in. But I also take heart in this, that I happen to be a horse racing fan. And if any of you have been to the horse races, you know what a long shot is. They sometimes win. Maybe it's my turn. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I wish the show could go on.